some help. I'm being robbed.
Oh no! Heather, we have to do something.
I can't. I need to with the thing.
What do you mean? You're a princess. This is your job. Protect her.
I would, but my cat's mother needs soda injections. Gotta go.
What? You get back here! Ugh, I can't believe she would just... Ah! What the heck?
Fear not, random citizen, for it is I, this land's noble hero, Awesome Blossom, here to save our citizens from peril.
Are you kidding me? Heather, this is serious. We don't have time for this.
Ah, dear citizen, you must have me mistaken for the ever-glorious Princess Heather Blossom of this land. That is a silly yet expected conclusion, for only a superhero like I could come close to matching her witty yet candorous presence.
Okay, 1. Half of your superhero name is your real name. 2. You're not even wearing a mask, you're wearing the same sunglasses that you wear every day. 3. You're letting the bad guy get away. And 4. What superpower could you possibly have that you couldn't already use being an alicorn princess?
I can fly.
We live in a land of magic ponies. Literally every other person can fly.
I'm also a telepath.
Are you seriously?
I took care of it myself. Thanks for nothing.
I've done it. My plan to make that helpless young mare a strong, independent woman was a success. Now she'll never be a hapless victim again. All of today's work in the life of Awesome Blossom!
I guess she's the hero we deserve, but definitely not the one we want right now.
Hello, my loyal subjects. Heather Blossom here. And who says Marvel and DC are the only ones who can make superheroes? I give you Max Steel. Ever heard of it? No? I'm not shocked. The only reason I heard about this series was thanks to D-Toons and their series tunes these days. These guys have a knack for piquing my curiosity. This wasn't the first time I checked out a cartoon they'd covered, but I'll say this has been the only one to stick. They honestly didn't do Max Steel the justice it deserves. They didn't badmouth it or anything. In fact, Conroy Cat seemed to have nothing but praise for the show, but there's so much more to be said that they probably just couldn't fit it into those minute animations they do. But enough about that. Max Steel! Property of the Mattel toy line, there has been a former iteration of Max Steel from the earlier 2000s. But the one I've grown obsessed with is the recent reboot with 2 standalone seasons referred to as The Wrath of Makino. There's been a couple of other continuations of this series such as Max Steel Dawn of Morphos and Maximum Morphos, but these have actually proven to be incredibly hard to find, at least for me. Apparently they've been released in cereal boxes in languages I don't understand, so I guess I'll hold off on those for a while. Okay, so, at first glance, yeah, this is probably the most by-the-book hero show down to its dumb opening sequences and the main protagonist, Max McGrath's superpowers, which all just stem from his body producing some extraterrestrial energy. The only way he can use this energy is through a conduit in the form of his plucky sidekick Steel, who programs it to power turbo modes. The overarching plot for the series is pretty straightforward. Threats of alien invasion, the reveal and creation of new villains and allies, and all that good stuff. There are other things thrown in there, like Steel having amnesia, authority figures holding back information from our protagonists where the what and why is blatantly obvious, and also independent arcs for support characters and villains. And that's where this series is very strong. It's really the characters that make it. Let me get this out of the way. There are some pretty annoying characters in this series, but there are only 3 that I think are utterly irredeemable. Them being the henchman Mr. Knot and our main protagonist's school friends. That's it. Starting with Mr. Knot, all I see is a waste of potential and an utter waste of space. He starts out as a slimy businessman, demanding, menacing, and of course a bit of a two-faced suck-up, which is well and good until he loses the businessly, menacing demeanor part and is just a slimy wimp, and cowardly, and cliche, and pointless, and blah 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 blah. On a design standpoint, his human look was intriguing with lines in his face and glowy synthetic eyes, but his battle form was utterly repugnant. And I'm pretty sure that wasn't on purpose. He's the henchman of Dread. Dread! Dredd is the bad guy who is responsible for the most dastardly and ultimately ingenious plots of the series. He's a better bad guy than Makino in presence alone, and Makino is a planet-eating tyrant who's supposed to be the main villain. The point being, how could this guy end up with a sidekick like this? Maybe they made Not the way he is to make Dredd look better in comparison, but that was highly unnecessary. Dredd is already cool. You don't need to try and make him look any cooler. You just make me question what's going on in his head that could justify keeping around a mutilated whipping boy as a second in command. Then there are Max's school friends who are so utterly annoying and unmemorable that I can't even remember their names half the time. Or any of the time, really. I think I actually need to Google it right now. Alright, their names are Sydney and Kirby. Kirby being the doofy and obvious stoner pal, and Sydney being the token blonde love interest. Whenever these guys are on screen, they just pile on one inconvenience after the next, either making Max commit to something he obviously has no time for, or getting mad at him for not being able to keep up with those said commitments. On one hand, sure, they have no idea he's actually Max Steel. On the other hand, how can they have no idea he's Max Steel? They're supposed to be huge fans of Max Steel, but they can't tell that their friend who has the same name as Max Steel, same voice as Max Steel, same body structure as Max Steel, and always needs to take a hike whenever something important happens involving Max Steel is Max Steel. And every time Max needs to run off superheroing, he always gives the most jittered, awful excuse. It's played up for laughs, but it's pretty hard to laugh at when the idiots it's delivered to actually buy it. I suppose the last thing we need is for them to start critically questioning everything. I'm certain that would only make them more annoying, but they've just got nothing appealing about them. Max does have one other school friend, but to his credit, he's not as bad. He started off as the bully stereotype, but he turns out to be a dopey guy who just succumbs to peer pressure fairly easily. He just wants to be accepted and liked, and once he goes through a plot with him in the secondary spotlight, he's rather enjoyable and even gets a few laughs out of me, so I'd say he gets a pass. Now to the real good stuff. I could honestly do character spotlights on any one of these characters, and I just might because every one of them is at least likable. The pilots and personnel of NTEC, the secret organization that helps Max Steel of course, are brave and have funny yet charming quirks. The only one I could think of that might get me to cringe is Berto, since he can be a bit too over the top, but I guess that's the point. He's an odd guy who skipped most grades and is a geeky genius. I met those types of people, and yeah, they're just like that. Dignity be damned. The main source of authority in NTEC comes from the commander who also happens to be Max's Uncle Ferris, and his mother Mullen McGrath, who is a strong, sexy badass who don't need no turbo energy. They're the ones who keep most of the secrets in this series. The secrets and the reasons themselves aren't that hard to figure out, which makes me feel pretty frustrated that they kept them secret at all, but it all comes down to how much they love Max and Steel. That's sweet enough, I guess. Max and Steel themselves are actually the flatter characters of this series. Max is a typical teenage guy who gets superpowers and wants to fit in but likes doing cool superhero stuff. Pretty straightforward. Steel isn't too complex either. Even with a shrouded background through most of the series, he's loyal, spunky, smart, and honestly I'm grateful for how he turned out because he could have been incredibly annoying in the wrong hands. And now to the great stuff, the villains. I've already given you a bit of the lowdown on Dredd, ultimately the more intimidating villain of the series, and on a design platform, he still takes the cake. Red and black color schemes may be cliche ordinarily, but he works it. His armor design reeks sinister and his voice is damn delicious.
Katastrofa. Niespodziewana eksplozja turboenergii na stałe przyspawała do mojego ciała urządzenie, które skonstruowałem. To było potworne. Ale dzięki tej technologii moje ciało wchłonęło turboenergię. Niestety, mój współpracownik, jemu się nie udało przeżyć. C'est la vie.
I would make love to that voice and carry its babies. I'm sorry I went too far with that, but there's just no comparison. Then there's this series' main antagonist, Makino, said to be the god and father of all Ultralinks, including Steel.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
He told me enough. He told me you killed him.
No. I am your father.
No. That's not true. That's impossible!
His character and motivations aren't anything complicated and can be summed up in every Ultralink's favorite motto, absorb and expand. At a narrative standpoint, he works well enough, and it's clear he holds more power than any other villain in Max Steel's current rogue gallery, so the threat feels real. Though it's accurate to say he's similar to the MLP villain King Sombra, serving more as a looming and powerful threat rather than taking a more active role half the time. In fact, most of the time all he does is spill out threats, only fighting in a handful of episodes near the climax, if that. As with Sombra, his low points come from his lack of direct action and minuscule characterization. What he really is and where he comes from isn't even explicitly revealed in this series. Online it's said he was an experiment to create the perfect being or something. Nothing I haven't heard before, but it could have proved interesting if it was ever explored. Now, being a power-hungry tyrant means you must have a lot behind your punch, particularly an entire Ultraling army. Their designs are cool and their powers are awesome. Their personalities usually go along with the archetype of whatever they bond with, so we have a fire and rock elementor who take on reckless, hard-headed personalities, and water and wind elementors who are the more thoughtful, calculating types. Obviously, this is where it's clear the toy marketing comes in, since we get the Ultralings that bond with guns and cars, but as long as it doesn't get too stupid, I think it's pretty neat. Oh, get the hell out! Really? Okay, don't worry. It gets better. Here's Extroyer. Yes, I know, he's tough to look at, but he's got enough going for him that makes the screen time bearable. Formerly known as Troy Winter, a skilled thief for hire who made the sorry mistake of stealing an Ultraling for himself that mutated his body, giving him the ability to shapeshift into any animal he can get a DNA sample from. Sometimes he can even do this with people. It's just incredibly horrifying when he does. His obvious appeal is in butchered animalistic designs, and he weirdly gets a laugh out of me now and again. He also has 2 henchmen that even get featured when he's not around. They're nothing to write home about, as they're either up to no good or act as victims of circumstance, but they can be pretty likable. Next, you can't have a proper rogues gallery without the villain who's just batshit crazy. And I gotta say, the cuckoo bird of this flock has gotta be my favorite of the whole series. Dr. Titus Octavius Xander was a former scientist for THI, or Transhuman Industries, which was one of Dredd's front companies. Apparently he wasn't treated with the utmost respect he deserved though. To add insult to injury, he got fired when Entech started cleaning house, and that drove him to gas the corporate building and make a bunch of purple people eaters out of all the civilians inside. But then the good doc's life changed forever when Max Steel forced him to dive headfirst into toxic sludge. The sludge infected his body and mutated him into a disgusting lethal villain known as Toxon. Now, why did he dive headfirst into toxic sludge? To save his fishy, of course. Oh, did I mention Fishy? He has a fishy. Fishy is the greatest evil mastermind ever known. He sports a black top hat, a sinister voice, and often talks things out with his mutant counterpart. At least he does in Toxon's head, cause in reality he's just a plastic fish that the nutball totes around all the time. They never formally diagnosed Toxon in the series, but it's clear his disconnect with reality might imply a mental illness. My guess would be like paranoid or disorganized schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder, but what do I know, I'm not a doctor. Well, I happen to know that before his toxic incident, he was obsessed with cleaning the world of pollutants. But since he was basically turned into a giant pollutant machine, he's now obsessed with the reverse. To make the world as filthy as he is, destroy humanity, and that one hot dog vendor who squirted mustard on him. As with most series these days, some villains get pulled to the light side willing or otherwise. Vengon is one such character, an alien bounty hunter out for justice, and is a self-proclaimed Ultralink hunter. The only sinker is the Ultralink he chose to capture turned out to be Steel. You know, the only good Ultralink. Through happenstance and understandings, he eventually becomes allies with Max Steel, but I have to admit I miss him as an antagonist because he presented something fresh. He had interesting abilities, from teleportation to a buttload of alien weaponry, and a personality that encompassed stoic, knowledgeable, and even awkward aspects. I also thought his design was pretty neat. Electric armor plates, long bent legs, green muscly arms, a face mask that lights up when he talks. Speaking of his voice, it's pretty cool and exotic. I mean, can you say husbando material or what? Well, no one said pimpin' was easy. Honestly, you could say Max Steel is a pretty bad show. It can be cringy, cliche, and to quote one Debbie Downer purple-eyed pony, "Pace is like an over-caffeinated Pinkie Pie, and the writing is only slightly better than the old Action Man series it's ripping off of." But you know what? It's fun, cheesy, and has good enough characters to work for me. What more could I want than that? I'm Heather Blossom, and it's time to go turbo!